Oh looky, a Game Gear game. And it's about that show that's currently celebrating its 20th anniversary and stuff. This cannot be anything but a pure coincidence. Well, actually it is just a coincidence. I wanted to talk about this game for a while, and I also wanted to get a copy for myself to see if the game was as good as I remember it being ages ago. Thankfully, once I got my hands on it and played it, I found out that it was all that and a bag of potato chips. I give it an A+. Wait. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is not only one of the best games based on the 20-year-old franchise, but it's perhaps one of the best fighters on the Sega Game Gear. It has a nice diverse selection of fighters, each possessing their own unique attacks and special maneuvers. The gameplay is fast-paced, there's a solid story mode alongside the traditional arcade mode, and the overall presentation is really slick for a supposed kids game. When discussing any of the old Mighty Morphin video games from ages past, most people will usually point to the Genesis version of Power Rangers the movie as the best game of the bunch, and it's somewhat easy to see why, considering its beat-em-up gameplay and Streets of Rage stylings, but this game on the Game Gear is a much more enjoyable and well-rounded game than that one. Not to mention this one plays better too. There are 3 modes of play in Power Rangers: Story Mode, Versus Mode, and Link Mode. Story Mode is the game's main mode, where you get to control the Power Rangers through 7 levels of fast-paced combat. Each level has 2 rounds. Round 1 pits your Power Ranger of choice against a squadron of putty patrollers that you'll have to fight one-on-one before facing off against the main monster of the day. And sometimes perennial whipping monkey, Goldar, will stick his nose in for good measure. Round 2 pits you in control of the Megazord to finish off the monster once and for all. Along the way you'll fight the Green Ranger and his Dragon Zord, and if you beat him, he'll join your team. This gives you a new Ranger to play with, and more importantly, 2 new Zords to play with as well. Okay, it's the Dragon Zord and also the Dragon Zord in battle mode, but still, when you play the second round, you have the option of choosing which Zord to head into battle, which is unlike the other offerings on the Genesis, where the Zord you control is dictated by the Ranger you picked for the first round of the level. It's a good thing that they gave you this choice, because I could stick with good old reliable Megazord rather than be forced to use the worthless Dragon Zord. Even Dragon Zord in battle mode to me is kind of meh, but that's just me. Your mileage may vary, of course. Versus mode is your standard arcade mode. You pick a character, you have to beat everybody else to win. Obviously, a Power Ranger and a Megazord cannot fight each other here, so your opponents are determined by what type of character you choose. Zords obviously have fewer opponents than a Ranger would. Now, however, if you complete Story Mode, you can unlock Dream Mode, which is essentially Versus mode with no restrictions. Which means you could have your Red Ranger tangle against the Dragon Zord, and you can even have mirror matches. And of course, there's the Link Mode, where you and a pal with another Game Gear can battle it out. That is, if you can find a pal with another Game Gear and a copy of this game. The combat is relatively simple. You have a punch button, a kick button, and a fierce attack performed when both buttons are pressed. You can throw, run in on your opponent, backflip away, basic stuff. Each fighter has 3 special moves, all done the same way, so if you figure out how to perform moves on one fighter, you pretty much know them all. They're pretty much all the same commands. But while the commands are common, the moves are not. Some fighters have projectiles, others have striking moves, some flipping moves, that sort of thing. Each fighter has their own unique style of fighting, so you could experiment with each fighter and stick with one that suits your style of play. Pulling off special moves and quick little combos are pretty easy, although the stronger moves requiring both buttons to be pressed may be a bit tricky, but not impossible. Control's responsive enough, there's no lag or anything of the sort. Moves execute fairly quickly and fairly well, nothing really to complain about here. Aside from the fair amount of substance within the gameplay, there's also quite a bit of style when it comes to the visual presentation of Power Rangers. For the most part, the graphical prowess is top-notch stuff, sporting fluid animation, colorful characters, and slick detail in the character designs and level backdrop. Each Ranger sports unique designs rather than being up-and-up color palette swaps, right down to the individual helmets. The various monsters and Megazords are instantly recognizable and possess quite a bit of detail to them. A definite eye-opener when one were to look back on the Game Boy MMPR released several months prior and look at the rather bland looking characters and levels and stuff in that game. The Game Gear definitely had the better looking portable Power Rangers game. I remember playing this back in 1994 off a friend's Game Gear and was amazed by the visual presentation of the whole package. Even today, this game still looks like a pretty sight. The story mode cutscenes are also nicely done, whether it be the static intermissions or the growing of the monster, complete with magic wand. It's all nicely done here. The only thing I didn't really care for were the morphing sequences. Everyone looks like they're either yawning or in the can while constipated. Yep. The sound quality is pretty good too. The various sound effects used in the game are serviceable and they don't grate the ears or anything, nothing too spectacular, but they serve their purpose. No voice bites to be found, obviously, but you do get a rather decent set of tunes in the background. Aside from a rather interesting, okay-ish interpretation of the main theme, the rest of the game's tunes comprise mostly original music that sound pretty damn good for the most part. Pretty underrated actually in my mind, because I honestly felt the songs worked well with the game. It's not a huge, massive selection of tunes, but what's there sounds pretty sweet sounding, in my opinion. I only wish they continued on with the original melodies in the follow-up Game Gear entry instead of butchering the Wasterman soundtrack, but whatever. Look, never mind the branding, never mind the fact that the whole game is based on a cheeseball kids shows from 1993 and up, never mind the fact that it's a licensed video game. Forget all that. The key thing here is that this is a fantastic fighting game on the Game Gear, with solid gameplay, slick controls, quick pace, plenty of options for a handheld title, and overall fantastic audio-visual presentation. While it might not be the deepest fighting game ever conceived, not by a long shot, it is still a very well-made video game whose only real limitation is the console it's released on, which means not many people are going to be able to play this thing unless they already have a Game Gear or track one down or resort to emulation. Which is a shame, because out of all the Mighty Morphin Power Ranger video games released during that initial wave in 1994, this one on the Game Gear stands out as the best of the bunch.